Everything we are showing here already exists, is already developed and is already working. There will be no planned features, no coming later and no placeholders. Upon release, the aircraft is complete from end to end. Okay, so, for anyone who missed it, a couple of months back I went pretty deep on the Vector 787. The studio that came out of nowhere in February announced they were building the 787 for us and made some of the boldest claims this hobby's heard in a very, very long time. Where I landed back then was cautiously optimistic. The electrical work, the engine detail, the windows, all of it was genuinely encouraging. But it was 5 screenshots and a presentation, and the whole point I kept coming back to was that trust is earned consistently, not in one good afternoon at FS weekend. So, since then, they've dropped their first spotlight. And the reason I opened on that particular quote, this one here, is because it's quietly the most important sentence of the entire post. Up until now, the headline was the best aircraft in flight simulation, a comparative claim in some ways. They'd be better than anything else already out there. But this sentence is a little bit different. It's a straight yes or no. No placeholders, no coming later. Everything in this spotlight already works. There's no wiggle room in a sentence like that. It either is or it isn't. And then there's this bit, and yes, we are targeting a release during 2026, toward the end of the year, and development is progressing exactly according to plan. So now we've got 3 claims, all on the record. Best in flight simulation, complete at release, shipping by the end of 2026, maybe 5 or maybe 6 months from where we are sitting now, which means for the first time we've actually got a date on the calendar. So that's the context, that's what I want this whole thing to hang off of, and the best place to start is what they've actually put in front of us. If everything in this spotlight already works, like they kept saying, then whatever they chose to show us is what they're now going to be standing behind. At least that's how I've taken it. But before we get into any of that, obviously there's a quick disclaimer, and I think some of you will already know this, but I am not a real world pilot. I have never flown a 787 or a Cessna or any aircraft for that matter. But it is important that you know that, because whenever I make a technical claim in this video, I am not asking you to simply take my word for it. And if you do fly these or simply know the aircraft better than I do, by all means, the comments are down below. Tell me where I get it wrong. Genuinely, that's half of the point of why I do these types of videos. But anyway, with that out of the way, and the one thing that I want to sit on first is the approach to JFK. In particular, this image right here. The magenta line, the wind direction, the inbound distance, all of that looks pretty standard. But the main bit that I want you to pay close attention to isn't the magenta line, but rather the VSD or the vertical situation display here. What it does is, instead of showing us the view from above like on the map, it's showing that same information but from the side, rather a cross section of the air in front of you. We have the altitude on our left, we have the distance to the bottom, and your aircraft sat on the left working its way from left to right. The magenta line is the active vertical path, which is the path VNAV will fly, the descent the FMC has worked out to get you down. The white line, however, is the flight path vector, which is where the aircraft is actually pointed in the vertical right now. So the magenta is the plan, and the white is kind of the reality. But then there's these 2 cayenne dashed lines each side, the VSD corridor. Everything between them is the slice of airspace that's actually getting drawn down on the VSD, and it draws that in 2 ways. The first way is through track mode, where the lines follow where the nose is actually pointing, and the second is route mode, where they follow the flight plan instead. Route mode only ever kicks in the air when you're on a path-based mode like localizer, FAC or LNAV, and the lateral path deviation is less than RNP, and the width of that corridor, while we're at it, is set by this RNP value of 4 down here, with the actual navigation performance next to it showing as 0.03. But, and there is always a but with me, I know that, there is an issue. Not only does the FCOM tell you exactly how it draws the corridor, it also tells you what's meant to sit in the waypoints themselves. And it says that here. Under waypoint ID and anchor line, quote, displayed with an altitude constraint directly underneath. Dashed vertical line depicts lateral position. During QFE operations, altitude constraints are shown in parentheses below the QRH values. And then the constraint marker itself, quote, displayed on triangles on the waypoint anchor line, which we don't have. Every waypoint that carries a published altitude restriction should, in theory, be showing that restriction under its name on the VSD with a little triangle on that line. I think I might have an image to pop up right now so you can see what I mean. And if you've ever flown the Cameron arrival, you'll know it is absolutely stacked with restrictions. At Hogs, we're expected to be at flight level 180, or the lowest usable flight level. At Cameron itself, you're expected to be at 250 knots and 11,000 feet for radar vectors to the final approach course. Now look at the VSD. Look at these waypoints. All of them are named, all of them have their anchor lines drop down, as you can see here, but under each of them, every one of them, there is literally nothing here. No altitude restrictions, no constraints, nada, zilch, nothing. Now in fairness, the FMC could be computing the descent against those constraints and it's simply not drawing out the annotations yet. The display logic itself might not necessarily be finished. And if I'm being honest, I probably couldn't tell you from a still image, and I wouldn't pretend that I can. But we have established that Vector are people who clearly know the symbology. They cared enough to get the corridor dead right in the VSD. This isn't a team that doesn't know or didn't realise the constraints belong there, which, if I'm honest, I'm struggling to know what to do with. Everything that I've praised, or all of the positives that I've taken out of this entire spotlight, like the corridor and the overall displays and the exteriors, which we will get to, it's all stuff that you can see, right? The bits that would legitimately put some of the skepticism to bed are a different animal altogether. Fuel, for example, still being in the pipes after you close a valve. Oxygen draining from the tanks when you test the masks. Faults carrying from one session to the next. 700 pages of checklists. None of that is shown at all. It's described to us, sure, written in the blog and left there, but why describe all of that in that kind of detail and not actually show us? And if I'm being completely fair, there is a cheap version of this point that I'm not going to really make, that they're just showing us the stuff that photographs really well, so the rest doesn't exist. You could make that argument. I think you're wrong, and I don't buy it, but you could certainly make it, because most of what they describe genuinely can't be caught in a screenshot. You can't photograph fuel sitting in a pipe after the valves have shut, or a fault that you have wrote up on one flight showing up on the next. This kind of stuff needs motion over time. A blog of stills, in a way, doesn't really do those things justice, however real it is. So I'm not really calling it a contradiction. A contradiction is claiming one thing and showing the opposite. The easy to show they have shown us. The hard to show they've only really described. And in a written update, that is fine. But it also means that the next few spotlights carry a lot more weight to them. Described isn't demonstrated. And there is one corner of this spotlight where they stopped describing and let the FMC actually do some of the thinking. And we can see that in this image here. In particular, the progress page on the right. If we cast our minds back to the previous video we did, the one FMC shot that we got was just this flat list of waypoints. Every leg was being flown direct to another direct, which is about the least damning thing you could ask an FMC to do. This, on the other hand, in fairness, is a step up from that. The progress page in the FMC is showing it's working, the distance still to run, the predicted time that you'll go overhead each point, the fuel you'll have when you get there. And credit where it's due, I honestly think this is a real move forward from the last time that we were here. But look at the destination to JFK, 155 distance to go. And if we look at the legs page on the left here, it shows us the remaining legs and their distances. Boton has 12 nautical miles, Hogs has 13 nautical miles, Pansy 7.3, Cars has 12, Cameron has 12. Add those up, and that's roughly what, say 55 miles from the aircraft's current position to Cameron by the FMC's own numbers. So 55 miles to what is essentially the doorstep and 155 miles distance to go don't really look like they fit. Okay, case closed, we've got them.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got them.
But those two numbers aren't really doing the same thing. The FCOM specifically states that distance to destination is the length of the whole planned route still ahead of you. Every coded log all the way down to the runway threshold. And it even spells out how to handle gaps in the route. Quote, calculated assuming the route of flight is direct between waypoints on either side of a route discontinuity. What this means is that the 55 nautical miles is only to Cameron, and the 155 total is the entire coded path to the threshold. And as I said, I'm not a pilot. This is my read, my interpretation, and I could be completely wrong. I can't see the rest of the route from these images, and aviation, much like law, is packed with nuance. I could be walking straight past something. But even given the benefit of the doubt, 155 miles all the way down to JFK from where the aircraft was then looks high. To stretch that coded route 100 odd miles past Cameron, that's a pretty damn long transition, or at least something tucked in there that isn't quite sitting right. And then there's the fact that Vector themselves told us in their own words that they are obsessed with the small details. This was their first showcase, the one they're asking us to take their very big claims seriously. And a discrepancy, if this is that, on their own FMC pages, whatever the innocent explanation turns out to be, is a pretty glaring omission in my eyes. But that's the stuff that I noticed, the negatives, I suppose, for want of a better word. For all of the picking that I've done so far, there was genuinely a lot in this showcase that genuinely impressed me. Take, for example, the nose gear tyre. Have a look at the sidewall here, where it says 40 by 16 by R16. And according to the Boeing 787 airport planning document, that is exactly the size that it should be. And it's a Michelin Air X as well, which also is what the 787 would actually have as well. But the spec, honestly, is probably the most boring part. Look closer at the tread. There are stones jammed in the grooves. And it looks to me, at least, like they've been naturally placed there as well. And I know how this sounds, I really do. We've gone from pulling apart the FMC to me crouching down and pointing at gravel. I get it, I do. I have ADHD, just allow it. But I honestly don't think anything in this sim right now does this. Not one. Also, as a separate note, but the actual wear itself, like, that looks incredible. These are not factory fresh new. The rubber is scuffed, there's dust, it's used grey in areas, and the two tyres aren't even carbon copies of each other either. You can see, for example, that this one is marked as R1 and then this one is marked as 097-1 maybe, I think that's what it says anyway, which is exactly how crews mark these tyres up if they have fitted them and then checked them at the time. Somebody on the Vector team knew these things were there to begin with. A small detail, which they did say they would focus on. Then there's the EFB here. In this screenshot, we can see the charts page and we've got the Cameron 5 arrival pulled up. But look down here at the bottom. Unsplit mode. On a real 787, the charts page can run in two different layouts. There's split mode, where the screen, as the name suggests, divides into half. The plan view of the chart, I believe, goes on the top, and along the bottom you get the briefing strip or the profile view or the minimums, and you can cycle through whichever you need. And then there's the unsplit mode, which throws the whole chart up to size. And that is what we're looking at here. Now, the big boys do charts perfectly well. Your PMDG 777, your Phoenix, they've all got working chart tablets with Navigraph. The difference is where the charts actually live. On older jets, the 777, the 737, the A320, charts were never part of the avionics. The crew, for example, would carry on an iPad or a clip-on unit off to the side. So when PMDG or Phoenix hand you a tablet, that is them being true to the real aircraft. The 787, however, is a newer breed. Charts are built right into the flight deck, wired into the avionics. So being faithful here means rebuilding the integrated system itself with its own page structures and soft keys, the harder road. And what this seems to suggest to me is that Vector have at least rebuilt the 787's real chart application, labelled in authentic ways Boeing do themselves too, rather than reaching for an off-the-shelf tablet and calling it close enough. But from this still alone, I will say that we don't really know if the split function actually works as it should be. And just to add to this, I will also say that it does seem as though Vector have wired in all of the charts that already come built into the sim, Lidos in particular, so you very likely don't need a Navigraph subscription to fly it in the way that it should be flown. And a good number of serious high-fidelity aircrafts out there, they will flat out not give you a usable chart outside of Navigraph anyways. And I think the fact that Vector is leaning on what's already sat in the sim, that is a genuinely thoughtful call. It does show us at least that they are considering as many people as possible, even those who can't really necessarily afford a £10 subscription a month to Navigraph. Also, I will say that the last image of the tail, I did notice here that this almost looks like wear and tear or like bird strike marks maybe, but let me know in the comments what you think. All in all, I think this update kind of leaves me in the same position as what I was the last time as well. The things that caught my eye, like the constraints and the flight path vectors, there is on the flip side a lot of positives. Whatever else is going on, I do feel there is a team that actually does genuinely know this aircraft, but it's still only screenshots and a blog post. So if I'm going to ask them for one thing going into the next spotlight, if there is another, it's this. Please, for the love of God, give us a video, please. Last time I said that I wanted to see the systems actually working, and a video is how we would finally get to see that. So show us it flying. Because everything that would genuinely put the skepticism to bed, all of the stuff that you can only really judge in motion over time, none of it lives in a screenshot. A still was never going to prove it, and a video would. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are as this as well. And also, let me know what you think this date could mean. 27th of December 2026. But that's where I'll leave it for now. And until next time, I'll see you in the next one.